My name is Laurie Paris, and welcome to She Life. My mother, Catherine Smith Gatormson, whose mother is Catherine Victoria Smith, whose mother is Nancy Smith, whose mother is Marion Mackenzie, named me Laurie Jean. I knew only two of these four women, but I carry their blood in my veins and their memories in my bones. May I speak our collective truth in a way that makes good change in a world that needs great change. The time has come for you and I to take our rightful sacred place in a culture that denies it. This is my story and journey to uncover the truth that supports my right to do just that, no matter the cost. I hope you decide you deserve that sacred place too. Episode 5, Jesus and the Men in Black Robes, a Call to Action. For many years after moving to Thunder Bay, I owned and operated a restaurant called Ruby Moon. It was a lovely eatery that also catered to local events. One year I agreed to feed adjudicators of an annual music festival, a bagged breakfast at their respective halls, and a sit-down lunch for all of them in the basement of a Baptist church. I arrived at the church a few days before the event to arrange a small area in the basement to act as a dining room, arranging the chairs, tables, and movable barriers to enclose the space. I was provided a key and unlocked the door to begin hauling the necessary supplies down to a large, well-equipped kitchen, placing bags and boxes on the counters and cupboards. As I headed for a second load, I looked out over the basement of the church and was surprised to realize I had seen the space before. I had seen it in a dream I had of Jesus. I had chanced upon Jesus as I wandered in this basement, curious to know what lay behind several doors lining the edge of its large open space. Same doors I was now looking at as I was preparing to head back up the stairs to get more supplies. In the dream, I walked to the first door. Opening it, I found several small tables for children with matching chairs and a large blackboard on the wall to write upon with chalk. The room behind the second door was very similar, with chairs for small humans and tables to match. I continued to open the doors that lined the left wall of the basement and found the third room decorated for the holidays. A Christmas tree standing near the far wall, tables with chairs, shelves of books, and holiday pictures colored with crayon posted to the walls. As I left and moved towards the fourth door, I felt someone following me. I could not see who it was, but heard a voice that said, "The only thing I like about the church is the celebration of Christmas, because they give the little children presents." I continued to the fourth door and peered in to see a man seated cross-legged on a small stage meditating in front of a handful of people. I decided to join the group in meditation and found a spot on the floor to sit, and then closed my eyes. I didn't stay that way for long, as I recognized the man on the stage, the man I believed had spoke to me while I was walking. I stared as he sat motionless, his eyes closed, his wavy brown hair touching the shoulders of the simple white tunic he wore, the tunic of a yogi, and then without warning, he opened his eyes, stood up, and started walking towards me. As I sat cross-legged on the basement floor of the church, I waited as the man in the white shirt and pants crossed the room. He was beautiful, and I was surprised and a little intimidated that he was coming towards me. When he reached where I sat on the floor, he got down on his knees in order to address me at my level, and in a kind, gentle, and no-nonsense manner, Jesus asked, "Are you still willing to do what you came here to do?" Without hesitation, I said yes, although I couldn't remember what I had agreed to. But this was Jesus, and although I had left the church long ago, I was still full of adoration for him. I was still ready to serve. My thoughts were racing, but I did not want to bother him with my personal fears. I would just have to figure things out and get whatever I had promised done, but for now I would just sit and look at Jesus. I knew he heard my thoughts, and so I waited for what he might say next, but he spoke no other words, just looked back at me, his eyes a color of blue I have never seen before, and then without warning, he began to bow. I would not let Jesus bow to me, and quickly changed my seated position as to be able to place my head and upper body in his lap. He did not stop his descent, and now covered me in his embrace, and I knew at that moment that I would be protected by him when I started to do whatever it was I came here to do. Most would be hard-pressed to find people unaware of the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Mary, the brother to Mary, and the companion of Mary of Magdala, the woman he cared for more than his other disciples, according to the Gospel of Philip, one of the Nag Hammadi texts. The crucifixion of Jesus is a central belief in Christianity, and the cross a principal symbol of the crucifixion and the Christian faith. But before there was the God Jesus, there was the goddess Asherah, who many scholars say was once the consort of Yahweh, the God who would eventually ask for her destruction. According to the Book of Kings, several statues of Asherah were at Solomon's temple before Josiah, the king of Judah, between 640 to 609 BC, began to implement religious reforms that removed the right to worship any other gods and goddesses other than the God Yahweh. According to the Old Testament, the goddess religion of Asherah was practiced in Jerusalem. She was known as the Queen of Heaven, the same title given to the goddess Inanna, the goddess Isis, and Mary, the mother of Jesus. In the book of Deuteronomy, the God Yahweh instructs the people to begin the destruction of Asherah's temples, and in doing so, destroy her religion and worship. In 1976, art historian and professor Marilyn Jacobson, also known under the pen name Merlin Stone, wrote the book When God Was a Woman, that had been previously published in the United Kingdom as the Paradise Papers, The Suppression of Women's Rights. In her book, Stone lays the groundwork and begins to unveil how the tribes of Israel, including Hebrews and early Christians, began the destruction of the religions led by women. In her book, Stone shares that in 1928, ancient texts were discovered in an old port city in northern Syria called Ugarit. The Ugarit texts tell us that Asherah was known as the creator of all deities. Dr. Maria Gambadis, a scholar, anthropologist, and archaeologist, would also write books claiming that the worshipping of a female deity had previously been practiced for thousands of years. Her 3 books, The Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe, The Language of the Goddess, that she co-authored with Joseph Campbell, and The Civilization of the Goddess, written in 1991, would cause a stir among old guard male academic archaeologists, as her claims of goddess worship and female-led societies would see many years of their research challenged. But Gambadis was not just any scholar. She came from a long line of scholars, including her parents, who were members of the Lithuania intelligentsia. The New York Times describes her as a prolific scholar, the author of 20 books, including a monumental study of Bronze Age Indo-European cultures and more than 200 articles. She has directed 5 excavations in Europe, reads more than 20 languages, and brings to her work an extraordinary knowledge of European folklore and mythology. Gambadis passed away in 1994, with her last book, The Living Goddesses, being published in 2001 with the help of Miriam Robbins Dexter, a women's studies lecturer at UCLA. Gambadis' scholarship proved that a woman-centered society existed in the past, as the Bible had referenced, and been destroyed and supplanted by a warring patriarchal culture. In 1990, Peter Steinfels of the New York Times explained her discovery by saying, Dr. Gambadis argues that between 7000 BC and 3500 BC, the people of Europe lived in sedentary agricultural societies that worshipped the great goddess, delighted in nature, shunned war, built comfortable settlements rather than forts, and crafted superb ceramics rather than weapons. The social system was matrilineal. Women headed clans or served as queen priestesses. Men labored as hunters and builders, but neither men nor women dominated the other sex. I love that these communities crafted superb ceramics rather than weapons. If there was ever a clear direction to initiate the battle cry of John Lennon, give peace a chance, here it was, in a goddess-led culture that, as Gambetta says, delighted in nature and shunned war. James Carroll, a former priest and the author of a recently published book, The Truth at the Heart of the Lie, How the Catholic Church Lost Its Soul, reminds us in his book that the first reference to the Jesus movement in a non-biblical source comes from the Jewish Roman historian Flavius Josephus, writing around the same time that the Gospels were taking form. Josephus describes the followers of Jesus simply as those that loved him at the first and did not let go of their affection for him. There was no priesthood yet, and the movement was egalitarian. Christians worshipped and broke bread in one another's homes. But under Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, Christianity effectively became the imperial religion and took on the trappings of the empire itself. Carroll recognizes that the church, through an all-male clergy, has become a religious institution of power and dominance over the people. Carroll calls for resistance to take on the corrupt priests of the church and their blatant misogyny. On March 13, 2013, Jorge Mario Bergoglio became Pope Francis, the Supreme Pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church. Within months of his ordination, he made his stance known about allowing women to join the clergy when he stated, "With regards to the ordination of women, the Church has spoken and says no." Pope John Paul said so with a formula that was definitive. That door is closed. Then, nearly 3 years later, on November 1st, 2016, as reported by Reuters journalist Philip Palella, Pope Francis reaffirmed his stance on the matter by saying, "The Roman Catholic Church's ban on women becoming priests is forever and will never be changed." He then repeats for a second time the words, "That door is closed." As recently as June 21st, 2021, an article written for The New Yorker by journalist Margaret Talbot said the Pope, quote, "lauds women's special virtues as wives and mothers, their inherent dignity, their selfless service to their parishes. He speaks about the Church as the bride of Jesus Christ." In 2015, he told reporters that women should be consoled and uplifted by the knowledge that the Church is feminine and that the Madonna is more important than popes and bishops and priests. Unquote. In reaction to Pope Francis's comments aboard the papal plane on November 1st, the Women's Ordination Conference, a group that promotes a female priesthood, made the statement, "Patriarchy will not have the last word." The WOC said it was profoundly disappointed by the Pope's comments, calling the document the Pope referred to, of Pope John Paul, as outdated, fallible, and painful. The Church cannot be afraid to examine customs when they no longer communicate or resonate with the gospel, and went on to say that a church that is not open to the gifts of half of its membership is unsustainable and out of touch with the needs of its people. According to Vatican figures, there are an estimated 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide. Roman Catholicism is the largest group of practicing Christians today, but in recent years has seen a decrease in membership in Europe, Canada, and the United States. According to a survey undertaken by the Pew Research Center, a fact tank that polls for public opinion and attitudes on issues that they themselves say shape the world, 4 out of 10 former Catholics say they left the church because, quote, they now disagreed with the Catholic Church's religious and moral beliefs, unquote. On January 11, 2017, reporters Nick Purdon and Leonardo Pelagia of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation reported a story about several women who dared to be ordained. The story, titled, I Have to Do This, Why Some Catholic Women Are Defying Church Doctrine and Becoming Priests, tells of the ordination of women, including Marie Bouclin, a former nun who left the church to marry. Bouclin holds a master's degree in theology from the University of Sherbrooke, where she studied, among other things, the abuse of women by the clergy. Purdon and Pelea report that Bouclin began working with an organization called Women's Ordination Worldwide, and in 2007, she became a priest herself, and in 2011, she was elected by the other priests in the women's ordination movement in Canada to serve as their bishop. Bouclin, now 80 years old, still considers herself a Roman Catholic and a priest, although she has been excommunicated, along with the other 200 women worldwide that have been ordained. In the same story, Roy Bourgeois, an American Roman Catholic priest for 40 years, was also interviewed, as he was the only practicing Catholic priest known to support and promote the ordination of women in the church. Bourgeois believes that the call men receive from God to serve as a priest is no less authentic than the call women receive from God to do the same. After he personally attended the ordination of a female priest into the Catholic Church, he received a letter from Pope Benedict XVI saying that he was causing a great scandal and he would be excommunicated if he did not recant his stance. He believed the harsh decision of the Pope was a warning to other priests not to do the same. Bourgeois was shocked that his support for ordaining women into the priesthood was viewed as a scandal in the church, as he believed, as others, that the real scandal of the Roman Catholic Church were his fellow priests who were caught sexually molesting and raping over 12,000 children in the United States alone. He was also asked why he thought women were being held back from being ordained. Bourgeois responded that in his experience as a priest for over 40 years, the main reason was that women were a threat to male priests' privilege and power. I have prayed and fasted about our plight as women and have found that one of the biggest culprits of female distress is the Roman Catholic Church. This church is the breeding ground of racial superiority, where crimes against humanity have existed for centuries, and the indoctrination of children into a foundational belief that all of us are born broken and sinful, that women are not worthy, that the indigenous are disposable, and all other beliefs are evil and inferior. Hundreds of years ago, the church took it upon themselves to boldly assert that their pope and priests were the representatives of Jesus Christ on earth, the only legitimate heirs to the words of his ministry through an unbroken line of disciples, beginning with the Apostle Peter. I don't believe for a moment that Jesus would ever have given permission to his heirs to kill the Cathars of France in the 13th century, execute witches or women of the earth between 1450 to 1750 AD, and sexually molest 12,000 children in the United States, molestations that were painstakingly exposed by the Boston Globe's Spotlight team of investigative journalists. In January of 2002, a two-part expose was published by the Spotlight team of the Boston Globe that included reporters Matt Carroll, Sasha Pfeiffer, and Michael Resendez, and their editor, Walter V. Robinson. The expose would eventually be made into a Hollywood movie and receive worldwide attention, with the newspaper receiving a Pulitzer Prize for public service in 2003. Michael Resendiz, who is credited with writing the initial two-part exposé, was tasked by the Harvard Bookstore in April 2021 to interview James Carroll for their virtual author series initiated during the pandemic about his book, The Truth at the Heart of the Lie: How the Catholic Church Lost Its Soul. Carroll responds to a question about the ordination of women into the Catholic Church, saying he believes it's a matter of justice, that women need to demand to be priests, demand their equality within the church, especially in the era of the Me Too movement. Carroll himself wrote op-eds for the Boston Globe from 1992 to 2015. He says in his book he is a shattered believer, but that Jesus is still the truth at the heart of the lie of the clergy and church, a clergy and church unwilling to change. Resendiz states unequivocally that he believes the church will endure one crisis after another by refusing to change, and that on May 27, 2021, news broke that the locations of as many as 215 possible unmarked graves of Indigenous children had been identified through ground-penetrating radar near a Roman Catholic residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia, Canada. The Indigenous community and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada believe there could be thousands more. In a previous podcast, I shared one of the pivotal moments that shaped my decision to leave the Catholic Church at such an early age. A moment where I was forced to put tissue on my head to adhere to the rule that all women must cover their head in church. I had forgotten my kerchief, and no one had another to lend me. I was unwilling to oblige, and only relented when the nuns shared they would be in trouble with the priests if I continued to refuse. These nuns were my caregivers and teachers. They had helped me understand the love of Jesus, and they had invited me and the others from St. Peter's Parish to go to their convent that day after Mass. I was in awe of these women and wanted to see where they lived, as I had dreams of becoming a nun myself. So I gave in and held the tissue on my head as I sat in the oak pew for over an hour, and then held it in place as I walked to the altar to receive Holy Communion, unsuccessfully fighting back tears of the complete humiliation I felt. I knew the nuns were not feeling good about what had transpired at the Mass when we arrived at the convent. I can't tell you how, when, or why the opportunity arose for me to share my feelings. I don't remember the exact words I spoke, but I remember the gist of what I told these women, who allowed me my soapbox to speak, quietly taking in everything I had to say. I respected these women and shared with them that Jesus would never have allowed me or other children to be treated in such a manner. I told the nuns that they were equal to these priests, that they were equal partners in the ceremonies and rituals of the faith, that they should be on the altar with the priests, not chasing little girls to put tissue on their heads. I don't remember everything in my speech that day, a speech made from a child's pain, naivety, and anger, but I do remember the silence of the nuns after I spoke, a silence broken after a nun I did not know asked her mother superior, "Can we keep her?" 18 years later, in 1983, I could finally walk into a Roman Catholic church without covering my head. I was 26 years old, now a mother of a female child that recognized if I did not do something before I died, she and her female children would continue to carry the same distress of living in a society subordinate to men. The world is not working. It hasn't been for a very long time. The rules and regulations that are set in stone by church and state, and now corporations, if we are being honest with ourselves, have become too heavy a burden to bear. The Pope has spoken and said the door is closed for women wanting their sacred role within the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope of the men in black robes say this ban is forever and will not be changed. If we want to live in a world that delights in nature, shuns war, builds comfortable settlements rather than forts, crafts superb ceramics rather than weapons, and where neither men or women dominate the other sex, we must return to a social system that respects women's sacred place in the world. There is a door that we have allowed to stay closed for far too long, the door to the mother of the world. Just knock. She is waiting there for you.